The last hurrah.
Here we are.
Here we are. This is what we get. I guess when you're ready to leave the board, they're like, oh, by the way, why don't you talk for 30 minutes about something important?
Yeah, it's been a fun 4 years on the board. I really am going to miss it. Suzanne DiPaolo, who is here, is going to be following in my footsteps, representing BNN. She asked, will I have to speak in front of everyone? I said, no, you won't. But yet here I am, second year in a row. But you know,
Yeah.
It'll be a good conversation.
Great conversation.
Yep.
So you've been on the board for now 4 years, and you came on the board right after James Daunt took over at Barnes & Noble. So what's changed in the last 4 or 5 years?
Everything. Everything, literally. I've been at Barnes & Noble for 13 years. So I had 8 years before James came on, and in those 8 years, we had 6 different CEOs.
Wow.
And over the past 5 years, James has brought what I think is key to this whole discussion of how do you move fast, how do you fix things. He's brought focus. And that more than anything has been what has changed. Barnes & Noble, over the past years, has had focus on how do we just be a great bookseller.
Yeah. So you're looking back, and there's a lot of things that have gone on, a lot of changes that have happened. What do you think is, how do you think they managed it? How do you think that they got, you have what, 600 different retail outlets across the U.S.? Like, how's that work? How do those changes come about?
Yeah, when you talk about moving fast and fixing things, the first thing is you have to know what you want to fix and what your focus is. And then you have to have a plan on actually how to get there and execute to move fast. You know, and the vision that James really laid out was let's get back to being a world-class bookseller. You know, have quality bookstores, update the store layouts, make sure that the assortment that we carry is localized to the local community instead of decided here in New York. Make sure that the non-book product that we carry is complementary to the books. Make the books the star, not trying, like we had for the 8 years prior, do everything but books. And so that focus let us then break those goals out into discrete steps. We had to identify what we needed to do in order to achieve all of those. And with that, then we needed to look at where's the leverage? What's the smallest change we could make? Which doesn't necessarily mean a small change, but the smallest change that you could make in order to move down that path.
Yeah, and that breaking things down, that's a really important part of any kind of process development. You're figuring out this step and then that step and then the next step. And things may change by the time you get to that first step. Yeah, that second step, and so you have to readjust. And you guys have done a great job of making that happen over the last couple of years. And lots of changes going on even right now, so lots of opportunities that you're seeing. What about, one of the big changes you guys have done is giving store managers more control. How has that helped? How has that worked for you guys?
Again, it's making sure that we have an assortment that the local community is really interested in. When you go into great bookstores, McNally Jackson here in New York, you walk by a table and you see 7, 8 books, and you're like, oh my God, I need every single one of those. And that's the experience of going in a bookstore, and that's what we're trying to replicate in every single community that we're in. With the store managers, it's interesting because we actually made a couple of changes in how we were localizing the assortment. There was a lot of control centrally here in New York on what the backlist was. And the store managers themselves were involved in doing reorders of front list and all of that daily. And we actually shifted that away we created a whole new role and shifted that away. So there were org changes that we had, process changes, all that. Introducing that new role also required new systems and new tools for those folks to order for the stores. So it is local ordering, but it's someone that's responsible for 4 or 5 stores in the same community. And my team here was critical in building that system out. And again, it was, how do we align things, structure what we work on? Again, finding that smallest thing. What's the minimum viable product coming from the software world that will get us along that path?
And you're putting more power to the hands of the experts at the local level gives you that ability to quickly adapt and change your direction on a small level. So you're not saying, big picture, we're going to do this everywhere. We're doing this in a small way. If you look across the publishing world, that actually would be a beneficial model for all of us, to think of things as this small change in this small area makes a huge impact on the entire organization.
Absolutely, and that's where all those small changes and those small wins accumulate over time, and that's where the local booksellers can respond to the trends in the community. We also respond to national trends too. Book Talk and all of that was certainly hugely helpful in the romantasy trend now. But then also we've started a project now where we're going back to our nonfiction assortment and reworking, starting with sports. If you go into any Barnes & Noble now, you'll see a completely revamped sports section, and working all the way through all of nonfiction in a way that builds out the assortment more, and that's being driven at the local stores.
So you've made a lot of progress. Where are things right now? In addition to the changes on the local level, bigger changes happening across Barnes & Noble.
Yeah, so we've made a ton of progress. As I said, in the 8 years prior to James, there was a lot of change in control. We really were still trying to find our footing, and we were closing stores. Finances were not good, and coming out of the pandemic, we did very quickly stabilize things financially, and then got to the point where now we are able to grow again. Like, we opened 60 stores last year, another 60 stores planned this year. When we close a store, we try to stay in the community, so relocating instead of actually closing, and it's that accumulation of those small wins over time, moving quickly on each project, getting those out the door, getting that value out there, that's put us in a position to be able to grow again.
And I imagine closing stores and then reopening stores gives you that ability to take those learnings, the lessons that you've learned over the last couple of years about what really works and what's a better approach. You know, you talked about non-book product and book product and kind of reimagining Barnes & Noble within the new space. That allows you to kind of come in fresh with that new idea in that community and to meet the needs of that local community with those other, now the local store managers having more control. So you're taking all of those different pieces and saying, even if we had to close a store, when we reopen it somewhere else close by, it's gonna be in a better form than it was before.
Absolutely, and as a company, we had to relearn how to open stores. It had been so long since the 90s and the expansion of the superstores and all of that. And like you're saying, the format. We're not going in and opening giant superstores. It's much smaller, curated assortments. And so as a company, had to start small, get those initial stores out there. They weren't always great. Some of those initial tranches of new stores we've actually already closed and are reopening other stores in that community again, just to get a better footprint, get it right. Yeah.
And that adaptation, we've seen the same thing at Firebrand over the years, right? Changing our approach, looking at things in different ways, and especially over the last couple of years as well. We're not as big as Barnes & Noble, of course, but it's interesting to see the kinds of things that you're dealing with and the approach that you're taking is applicable across the industry and even in a software company like us.
Yeah, so 5 years is post-pandemic.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a similar question. What have you seen at Firebrand as far as moving fast and fixing things over the past 5 years?
Well, we're always fast. We're always fixing things. I think it's really interesting, too, if you think about the history of Barnes & Noble and where you guys have been over the last couple of years. Firebrand's been in a similar spot. You had a a sale of the company and a new CEO come in. We had a similar kind of situation. Fran Tulin, who was our founder, he retired and sold the company, and Angela Boll, our CEO, came in a couple of years ago. And she has a huge background, big background in IBPA, and worked for BISG for many years as well. So she's got a really solid understanding of publishing, and came into Firebrand to kind of help lead the charge in the new direction. And it's been really interesting to see the changes that have occurred. The changes that we've seen over the last couple of years have been a long time coming in some ways, but also just inspired. The approach that we're taking now is inspired by some of the same things that you've seen as well, right? We're having to readjust and adapt our approach to meet the needs of the publishing industry today. Tom Shaver, who's our CTO, he's here today. He joined us about a year ago, and he's one of those change magnets, I think. He came in with great ideas, but not just great ideas, great execution. How do you take a team? Firebrand's been around for over 35 years, and some of our software products have been around for 30 plus years. And when you have software that's been around that long, there's a lot of institutional kind of built-in functionality, but also some technical debt that needs to be handled. And so we've worked on that for many years, working through technical debt. But the cool thing is to see how, like Tom, for example, has taken our development teams and said, how can we think about things in a fresh way? How can we look at new technologies, taking different technologies than we're used to working in, and adapting those into our workflows, and adapting those into the software itself, and not holding ourselves to the way it's always been? And that's inspiring. It's important for every company to kind of look at your workflows and look at your software and look at your processes and figure out how you can adapt to new things. And I think that's where Firebrand has been the last couple of years. We've been pushing down that adaptation road.
Yeah, so I hear a lot of similarities there of a clear vision, a focus, a revitalization of what to work on. Are there any, can you talk a little more about in software development, or how you approach moving fast?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in software, you have different types of workflows than necessarily in publishing. Agile workflows. You might use a sprint system or a Kanban system to kind of maintain those processes. I think the sprint idea is a really interesting one, though, and I've seen publishers implement this even. But that idea of taking small change, kind of like what you were talking about at Barnes & Noble, you look at, this is a small thing we can do within this short period of time and make big progress, and then release and see how it works. Okay, that's great. Oh, we see this thing. Let's do another sprint and see how that works, and do another sprint and see how that works. So you're releasing early and releasing often. It's another phrase we use in software. But you're thinking about things in small pieces, but looking at things strategically from a very large perspective. And I've seen publishers actually implement those kinds of processes internally as well. I've seen really interesting adaptations of the software model in the publishing workflow. But the key really, I think, for any kind of moving fast and fixing things is you're moving fast in small increments. You can't make huge changes in a fast way. If you make huge changes, big changes, you could turn the ship upside down. You could cause major problems. But if you make small changes, it's easier to change here and there and tweak and keep on the path. And I think that's something that's an interesting approach in software that might actually benefit the rest of the industry as well to think about as well.
Yeah, it's about not breaking things.
Right.
The inverse of the Silicon Valley formula.
Well, that's commonly we would say break things, but you don't want to break things really. You might break something small. You might move fast on a small thing and then break that thing, and you're like, oh, well, let's fix that in the next sprint, and come back to it again and fix it for good.
And with Agile, with releases, that really is about finding product market fit or finding out what your customer base is looking for, and Firebrand's had great success with that.
We have, yeah, and there's a couple of things that we've done recently that I think are great examples of that approach. our Flywheel service, which is a metadata marketing service for backlist titles, has seen amazing success, helping publishers find money that they never knew existed in their backlist. And that team went from idea to launch within less than a year, developing not only the process and the service itself, but tools behind the scenes that can be used to really do the work, help us do the work and find the titles that are going to pop and going to be beneficial. And then our NetGalley team as well has been working on a really awesome service called Booktrovert, which is a consumer marketing platform that's launching in June. And again, from inception to execution, from inception to launch, it's been about a year, and even less than a year on development, I think. And that, again, is one of those things where we see a problem, we see a need, and we try to find a way to fix that need, to help that need. That's the great thing about having a short-term goals that are executed with a long-term strategy.
Yeah, less than a year from idea to product is incredibly fast.
Yeah.
What sort of roadblocks did you face in launching those products?
Resources. Resources is always the problem. You have very few people to work on projects, and you have to, who do we take off of which team to bring them onto this new thing, or who do we hire from the outside to come in and help? And time, because resources and time go together, of course. But when you have an idea and you know that it has some value, and you're going to invest in that idea, and this, again, the same thing applies to book publishing. We invest in ideas, and in the publishing world, you invest in, if you're a printer, investing in a brand new press, or if you're a publisher, investing in that author, in that new imprint. You're putting investment and time into something, and then you have to wait to see the results. And so you have to be patient and work hard on that process until things actually come out of it. And it's the same thing in our, the software side. You have to put the money down and invest in those people, those developers, and the marketing and sales and everything else to hopefully in the end see the success.
You mentioned patience.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a critical point here.
Yeah.
Especially at the beginning, because when you're talking about what you need to address, when you're doing the analysis to break down, okay, here's our goal way over there. What do we need to do to get there? It can feel like you're not actually doing anything.
Yeah.
And there's a temptation to move, to do something.
Uh-huh.
And sitting with the problem, identifying what really needs to be worked on is actual movement.
Yeah.
It just doesn't look like it.
It doesn't look like it, yeah. And sometimes the problem that you think you see is actually just a symptom of a bigger problem that really needs to be addressed. And we saw that with our Flywheel program. We actually had other ideas when we finally came up with, okay, this is what we're going to do. For months before that, it was, there's this big issue we see, this other issue we see, like narrowing it down and figuring out what's the core problem that really needs to be fixed and how do we really help? What's the real solution that's needed? And if you take the time, if you have some patience, you're able to get to a point where you're able to actually see the real problem.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you think all this applies to BISG?
Well, it applies to everybody in the room, right? And BISG is about fixing things, and moving fast maybe not so much. We don't always move very fast as an organization, but we do fix things, right? We're here to help any of the different segments of the industry find solutions to problems, and it's important for every person that's in this room that's listening to our voices to advocate for that within their organizations, because BISG becomes the center point for conversation, for engagement, and if we can have that patience to work through the hard problems, or we can have the insight to see what that problem actually is, then we together can work to find a solution that actually will be solid and effective in the industry.
Yeah, I've seen in my 4 years on the board that BISG, and knowing the history of BISG, that it provides such a critical role in the industry of identifying those problems.
Yeah.
and seeing what we together need to work on. But then the challenge is it's a small staff.
Yeah.
We grew and have a wonderful staff, but it's 3 people.
It is.
And they do, we were talking about this yesterday, 110 meetings a year, 35 events, help run 5 different committees and 9 working groups. There's a lot of problems in the industry we're trying to face. So we're aligned, but we're spread thin.
We are. And the volunteers help with that a lot. And for those of you in the room who are volunteers, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you're serving on committees, yeah, give them a hand. That's important. Because the number of people who serve on committees and engage in the conversation and volunteer their time to dig into stuff, I'm thinking of people like Pat Payton, who I think has put more time into metadata in the last couple of years than any other person in the world. There's people who put so much of their effort and time into this stuff that supports the mission of BISG, and that's the only way the organization really can succeed in what it's doing.
Yeah, and when we talk about focus, we have book publishing next, which is going to be next. And that really has been in the works for a few years now, but provides, there's a white paper that's going to be given out a little later during lunch, and that provides a clear focus on what to work on. And I think it's such a critical, pivotal moment for BISG, and if we can figure out a way between the staff, between the board, and all the volunteers to make progress on that, it can remove so many headaches around metadata, around supply chain communication, around transparency, that is a lift all boats type moment, so that each of our individual companies can get back to focusing on really moving forward with our individual businesses. Because all of these pain points that we talk about distract from the core mission of whatever any of our companies are trying to achieve.
Yeah, but we're all, that's the great thing too, is we're all together in that boat, right? Well, different boats, but we're all together in the same sea, I guess, to keep your analogy intact. But so if all of us work together, we can actually make a huge difference in the way the industry moves, while also benefiting our individual organizations and companies. There's a value in being aligned in the same direction. There's value in taking the time together to engage in hard questions and to talk about hard things. I'm really glad that this is the topic this year, that we're talking about moving fast, but also fixing things. Because we can always move faster, but we may not fix things. And if we take the time and we're patient and work through the problem, and like I said earlier, break it down into smaller chunks, each individual committee is working hard to engage in a small chunk of the industry, a small piece, a small area, or maybe a big area in some ways, but working on it in pieces. And the engagement we can bring, if every company, every organization in publishing just works together and is willing to put a little bit of effort into it, that little bit of effort makes a huge amount of strength as a company, as an organization.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm really glad we're talking about this. I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of the conversations today as well.
Yeah, likewise.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, guys.